All right, this house in Marysville, Washington is listed at $590,000. And I'm going to be talking about what it would look like to buy this house, specifically what your numbers might look like, what your monthly payment might look like in two different scenarios. I'm going to look at a 5% down scenario and a 20% down scenario. So you have a sense of right now in this market of where things might be at for you. So let's look at the house real quick. So this is again over in Marysville, which is just north of Everett, and it's a great looking house. Again, only listed at $590,000, which for anything in this general area, the greater Seattle area, at $590,000, this is a lot of house. But obviously you're paying for it with just the commute to Marysville. If you're living anywhere in the greater Seattle area, you can see, it's just a sweet house. Lots of cool updates. Nice view and good area. So sweet looking house, and we're just going to look at the numbers. So let's flip over to look at a quote here. All right, so here are the numbers that I'm using to create the quote. I'm looking at $37.22 in taxes annually. You can grab that from the county website, which Zillow has a link to. Homeowners insurance, I'm assuming $1,500 annually, about $125 a month, and obviously that's going to vary a little bit depending on your provider and what you have covered. But this for this price point in this area, that seems to be a pretty reasonable estimate for us that we use. Credit score, I'm assuming 700. And in one of the scenarios, I priced it out in the 5% down scenario. I'm assuming you're a first-time home buyer, which means that your credit score isn't quite as impactful on your rate. It still has an impact on your mortgage insurance. But on the 20% down scenario, I assumed you are not a first-time home buyer. And the reason that makes a difference is because, like I said, with the credit score, there are just different programs available based on whether you're a first-time home buyer or not. It has an impact on your pricing in general sometimes. And then DTI, debt-to-income ratio, I wanted to explain real quick because I'm going to touch briefly. I'm going to just show you the quote, and you can figure out whether it's in your comfort range as far as affordability. But I'm going to talk briefly in case you want to know about qualifying, what income it would take to qualify for each of these payments. So debt-to-income ratio, DTI. This is the ratio that results from dividing your total monthly debts divided by your gross monthly income. And that number needs to be less than 50%. So if you have other debts, if you have car loans, student loans, credit card loans, that bump you slightly, or that when you account for those, when you include those and divide it by your gross monthly income, it bumps you slightly over 50%. There is some flexibility on that ratio with FHA, where that back end ratio is what they call it, which is when you include the other debts beyond just your housing payment. There is some flexibility. If that goes over 50%, there's a little bit of wiggle room with FHA versus conventional. So that's good to keep in mind. But generally, as a good rule, this is what we're going to be looking at, is this number needs to be less than 50%. And that's gross monthly income, income before taxes, which if you're making a salary, that's pretty easy to calculate. But if you have variable income, or you're self-employed, or it's a little bit more messy and it's not just as clean as this is the income I make every year, then lenders they have strict rules as far as how they calculate what income they will use for qualifying. So you just need to talk to a mortgage provider on that. But let's go ahead and look at the numbers that result the possible monthly payment right now. All right, so you can see the two quotes here. On the left is the 20% down scenario, and on the right is the 5% down scenario. In this one, I'm also assuming you're a first-time home buyer. This one, you are not a first-time home buyer. So that impacts the pricing a little bit more than just the down payment amounts right here. So the down payment amounts you can see show up right here. Or those are the actual loan amounts. Those are the loan to value. So you're in the 5%, obviously you result in a 95% loan to value, which means your loan amount is $560,500 if we're using the purchase price of $590,000. You may have to offer above that, I don't know, but if we end up with the 80% loan to value, that's a loan amount of $472,000. Both of those are conforming, so meaning they're below certain limits. That if you have a loan amount above a certain amount, that becomes a jumbo loan, and the pricing gets a little bit more tricky, a little bit less favorable. Both of these are conforming loan amounts still, so we're good there. So you can see, let's pop down the interest rate. Interest rate on the 20% down is actually 8%, whereas the 5% down is 7.125%. And both of these are with 0 points. You can see 61 and 106. That's basically 0, because those numbers could be 5,000, they could be 10,000, 20,000. So we're basically paying for 0 points here in both scenarios, which means you're not paying a fee in order to get a lower interest rate. That is an option. That is something you could do. It's good to know that's an option, but in this scenario, I'm not quoting that. Both of those are just 0 points. And so what that does to the monthly payment is, in the 20% down scenario up here, you get a monthly payment of $3,899, and the breakdown of that is, you can see the insurance and the taxes are based on the house, not the loan amount, so those are going to be the same in both scenarios. However, the P&I here, there's no mortgage insurance in the 20% down scenario, which means that the remaining portion is just the principal and interest, $34.63. And then on the right, you do have mortgage insurance because you are less than 20% down. So the mortgage insurance in this scenario is $210 a month, which leaves the principal and interest at $37.76. Real quick note on mortgage insurance, there are different theories, different ideas on whether you should buy a house when you're below 20%. Again, mortgage insurance is tacked on when you are below 20%, 20% down. And some people will say just completely avoid mortgage insurance at all costs until you can hit 20% down. So don't buy until you can hit 20% down. My wife and I bought at, I think, 3% down last year, or 2 years ago now. And I'm perfectly comfortable with mortgage insurance because for me, it's the price of being able to get into a house sooner. Because if you actually quantify it at $210 a month and compare it, and people will tell you that's $210 a month you'll never get back. It's not going into the house. Sure, but if you compare that to your realistic alternative of paying rent for us in our area would have been $2,000 a month. Until you can hit 20% down, which it would have taken several years to get to the point where we could hit 20% down at home prices in our area. It was not a deterrent for me at all. The overall picture of money gets more and more expensive when you are at a lower down payment. Sure, that's something to consider, but just mortgage insurance by itself is, I think it's a silly reason to stay away from buying. Now, if you're at the point where you could afford 17% down, but you can't quite get to 20% down, maybe that's another story, and you can wait a few months and save up another couple $1,000s. Sure, that would be another story. So what that leaves us with is closing costs of $10,000 in both scenarios, and then so what that means is, given the down payment plus the closing costs, total cash to close in the 20% down scenario is $130,000, and in the 5% down scenario is $41,000. My name is Landon Buteau, and I am part of a mortgage team in Bothell, Washington, called Cleveland Street Mortgage. I work closely with my dad, Chris Buteau, who has just tons and tons of experience in this world. So if you'd like to work with me and work with our team, work with my dad, please check out, there's a video in the description. There's a link to a video in the description here that you can watch that gives you an idea of what it's like to work with us. You don't have to jump right in and reach out. You can just check out what it's like to work with us and see what our process is like. And then if you do want to reach out and you're interested in getting a mortgage with us in Washington or Idaho, feel free to call, email, text, or schedule a call, whatever works best for you.